Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at, ladies and gentlemen. I am Professor Christopher McGlothlin, and this is The Ghost Show. That cost us $2.3 million. We lied about being a college. We got a grant from somebody. It was beautiful. All right, but enough of the shaky financial doings of this. I'm Professor Christopher McGlothlin, and it is my great blessing in life to be the creative pit boss of Ghost Show Press, a small but mighty guardian of creator rights, and trying to, in our own weird outsider way, expand the art of cinema commentary. And joining me today are three contributors to the latest in our series of books. Everyone's Gone to the Movies. You may be familiar with the first two. Let's show the front here. Transgressive Horror, Volume 1, and Volume 2, Subversive Sci-Fi. And we're in the process right now of kickstarting Volume 3, Fantastic Flops. And if you haven't heard the good news about that, then as soon as you're done listening to the awesome stuff we have to talk about, please go to that URL and check it out. We've got a lot of great stuff going on, and certainly amongst that greatness are these three fine gentlemen that are with me today, all three of which multi-time contributors to the series. And we're just going to go around the Brady Bunch grid here and give them a chance to introduce themselves here. So joining us the first time ever on the show, Mr. Mike Mason. Mike, say hello and tell people what you do.
Hi. What I do most of the time is I'm the creative director at Chaosium, and work on the Call of Cthulhu tabletop role-playing game. So I develop and edit and write for that line, basically.
Yeah, and if I tell the people that there are tentacles behind you and just above your head out of frame, yeah, now people will believe me that I'm not just making that up to be cute for the show here. Alrighty, and moving down to the next level is Mr. Matthew Dawkins. Welcome, sir. Tell the folks a little about yourself.
Hi, my name is Matthew Dawkins. I am a tabletop RPG freelancer, writer, and developer. Most of my work is with Onyx Path Publishing. The games I'm probably most well known for developing are They Came From cinematic role-playing games to my right, although I've got a fairly colourful history with The World of Darkness, among various other games too. And the one I'm working on right now is The World Below, our sort of subterranean horror fantasy RPG, which is looking very exciting.
Yes, indeed. And for those of you who are wondering, after having seen me and Matthew, do authors just carry copies of their books with them everywhere they go? Answer, yes.
It's the only way we get hired these days. With the death of the X, it's impossible to network online. We just have to literally carry hardbacks around with us and shove them in people's faces and say, "Hire me." It's a sad state of affairs. The final days of Sodom, if you like. But I'm ready for them. I came prepared.
and also joining us today, Mr. Colm Lundberg. Colm, tell the folks about yourself, please.
Yeah, if I can recover from that for a minute, yeah. So I'm a game designer and a freelance RPG writer as well. Got some stuff for Pathfinder and the Chronicle system here and there. I also work for the Irish government, but I don't like to talk about that because they're behind me.
Mm-hmm. And feel free to talk about Love to Hate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's out of print now, sadly. Although you never know. That's a card game I designed with Green Ronin. It's kind of it's a party game, but it's out of print right now, as are the expansions for it. But who knows? Who knows what Gen Con might bring? I might kind of press gang people, or kind of threaten them, or just get Irish on them.
But I've got a window where I could sell my excess copies and pay my mortgage for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. The first edition, limited.
Oh. All righty. Well, let's see here. Well, we're here today again to talk about what we're doing for our current Kickstarter book, Fantastic Flops. We went in with the brief of pick a film that either failed with critics, failed at the box office, or both, and talk about why people should still see it. And it's given us a great opportunity to talk about some I think some underserved gems, films that didn't get their due in initial release that should have, like Big Trouble in Little China. There are some of us that are, we're defending things in a bizarre sort of way, and I think of Jason Walters going at Battlefield Earth, whose general take is you should see it because you will never see that much talent and money go to waste. It's sort of an anti-see the pyramids of Egypt kind of thing. But we're attacking a lot of, and honestly, no hate for sci-fi, no love for horror. If you see the titles behind me, it's allowed us to branch out a little bit. We're covering our first 2 superhero movies. Simon Bacon is doing Morbius. Murray Leader is doing Ang Lee's The Hulk. And well, hey, that's a great segue into giving Mike an opportunity to talk about how he's actually talking about a comedy, just an out and out comedy, not horror comedy, not sci-fi comedy, but a straight comedy for the first time ever. Mike, you want to tell the folks a little bit about your movie and what drew you to it, and give them a little teaser of what you have to say about it?
Well, sure. Well, I mean, I cast around for quite some time when you invited me to contribute for this new volume. And I was I was really stuck for a moment because I was trying to think, well, all the films I like probably flopped. They're all kind of culty kind of films that kind of found an audience later. Mm-hmm. So I was generally quite unsure what films were, you could say are definitely flopped. And so I was casting around, and one, I was putting in like lists into Google, kind of, what, by year, going like, what were the results on these films, and one came up, and it completely surprised me because I never realized it had kind of not really done that well on release. And so and that was The Big Lebowski by the Coen brothers. So as I'm a fair fan of the film, I thought, well, that sounds good to explore that, and I might learn something too by kind of getting into it as well. So I've written about the Big Lebowski, and I really kind of, most of the time when I watch a film like that, I just kind of let it wash over me, and I kind of just, come away having laughed a bit and enjoyed it, and, move on to the next thing. But so it allowed me to kind of really kind of get into the bones of it and kind of think about what is it about this film? Because I mean, I remember, I don't know, a handful of years ago, I don't know if it was across the world, but certainly in the UK, there was a thing to sort of say, hey, everyone watch The Big Lebowski on New Year's Eve. And it was this kind of just big thing that happened, and we all kind of did. And it kind of got me thinking, why that film? And that, I got into kind of exploring, why does this film have this kind of following? Because it genuinely has a following. Unlike many other films have been equal status or equally successful or floppy or whatever, but it's got this, it got abiding interest with people who kind of get it, I guess. It's not a film for everyone, of course, but it is. It's got a lot in it. There's so much going on in it, in fact, and thinking you miss it sometimes. But that's what I chose. Yeah.
I bought the Criterion edition of Inside Llewyn Davis, and the Coen brothers talk a little bit about their film catalog, and even they seem a bit bemused that like Barton Fink got multiple Academy Award nominations, and yet nobody's dressing up like Barton Fink and founding a religion. Even they seem to be a bit baffled that, like, why out of their body of work this is the one that kind of went to the next level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It kind of, when you kind of think, I was generally trying to think about, there's Rocky Horror, which we all know about, again, not a particularly big success on release, but found its audience and became tremendous, and is now tremendously successful in stage shows and revivals and all sorts of things going on. And I was trying to think, well, what are the films? The Lebowski's like that because it's got a religion and it's got its own conventions and festivals and events going on. Other than the kind of one-off things, there might be a Jaws rescreening or an Alien retrospective, but they're kind of one-off. There's no. Well, maybe I shouldn't say, but there's no religion for Jaws, but perhaps other than my own. But I don't recall like an Alien or a Terminator kind of convention. I mean, maybe there are, and I've just not seen them. But I really struggled to find another film that's really got that tale, that length, that's kind of inspires people to, as you say, dress up like the dude and drink White Russians. Yeah.
All right, and credit to our viewer Brobameliad for that comment. Thank you very much. Yes. And,
Yes.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing that a film that gets quoted that much, you can still do it, and people don't want to hit you like.
Well, unlike Python, you mean that kind of like.
Yeah. Although credit, I did see a meme this week. Credit to the person who photoshopped Elon Musk into the dead parrot sketch carrying the dead Twitter bird.
Yeah, genius.
All righty, and hey, just to show you what we can do with fantastic flops is not only. Wait, excuse me. Oh wait, one last thing about Mike's Big Lebowski piece before I forget. Just to show you how, whatever else you want to say about me, I know some incredibly talented and creative people. Mike includes his own patented White Russian recipe in Fantastic Flops. So, my friends, at no extra charge, whatever you pledged, no extra charge for this, it is technically a cookbook now. So there you go. So
and it's kind of required that you need to have one when you read the essay on the Big Lebowski.
Certainly when you get to like my piece on Plan 9, if you've had a few, it's going to go down better, really, seriously. All righty. And okay, so you're thinking, all right, so you've done a comedy now. What else could you do? Well, thanks to Matthew Dawkins, we have now added a musical to our repertoire, as Matthew has gone after one of the great holy grails of flops, the massively underrated Ishtar. So Matthew, you want to talk about Ishtar a little bit, about what drew you to that, and what makes you want to talk about that film?
I don't know that I'd classify it as a musical. I suppose it's trying to be a comedy, isn't it? I mean, Mike really got the golden assignment there with the Big Lebowski. With that, as you say, Mike, that and Rocky Horror are, I guess, the perennial flops that became cult classics, and Ishtar definitely is neither of those things. So yeah, I went for Ishtar because I think it is unfairly maligned. It's more a headline flop than a material flop. The actual movie, its composition, the performances within it, the jokes told within it, is all pretty tidy. It's compact. It's an easy watch. It's fun to watch. The music, such as it is silly. It's bad, but it's deliberately bad. It doesn't break into musical scenes. It's just the protagonists in it are a pair of musicians or music writers that decide they're going to make it big by heading out to the Middle East, North Africa, more accurately, in the middle of a war zone because they can't get booked in America. And as a premise, that isn't necessarily the strongest. It doesn't hold much water, but Dustin Hoffman's in it, Warren Beatty's in it, and I think they do a pretty damn good job. But famously or infamously, the movie, I wouldn't say it flopped due to the lack of laughs or the weakness of the material, but largely it's one of the victims of massive studio interference, over budget spending, clashes of astronomical egos, when you consider that people like Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty had editing clauses and basically started acting as executive producers. They were invited to do so, but it turned out that may have been a misstep, and then the studio brings in another producer who basically doesn't like anything he sees and starts gutting the movie. It results in a tortured development process, a release that is rather sort of, we're just going to push this out without telling anybody about it, rather than we're going to make this another big late 1980s family John Hughes-esque comedy. And so, yeah, it just kind of flopped as a result of I guess, bureaucracy, if you like, more than material. So I it's a movie that has subsequently seen Blu-ray re-release. I think there's a 4K high definition release, and it looks beautiful. It is as I say, it's a solid film. No, it's not the greatest comedy ever made. That's clearly Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but it is a perfectly decent, amusing feature. And I think it, really very much deserves reappraisal today. It's been done dirty over many years.
Yeah, one of the great things I appreciated about your writing was, I think something we can appreciate with hindsight, that, you have Warren Beatty that created a whole new era of cinema with Bonnie and Clyde.
Mm-hmm.
You have multiple Academy Award winning actor Dustin Hoffman in it. Elaine May, who quietly reinvented comedy in the 60s. And Paul Williams, who has done everything from write legit hit songs from multiple artists to giving us such boons as Phantom of the Paradise, to being in Smokey and the Bandit. And it's just now that the easy punchline is cleared, you see how much talent was in this, and it's really hard for that much talent to go completely wrong.
Yeah, and it's not one of these movies where I think there's ever going to be great demand for the director's cut, and I very much doubt Elaine May is going to ever want to return to that, because this pretty much drove her out of the industry for a long time, as a director, anyway. And I don't think it necessarily demands a director's cut. It just demands to be seen, I guess, distinct from the bad press that it received at time of release, which is a hard ask, because you look up Ishtar and the first thing you see is it's a catastrophic failure. Rotten Tomatoes 40%, I think, and IMDb around 4%, or 4 out of 10, I should say. And yeah, some of that is, of course, is taste, is subjective. That's fine, but I strongly believe most of that is just it's bad press sticking to it, and undeservedly so. Because I think the cast has chemistry. I think the writing, as I say, is perfectly solid, and the performances really entertaining. I when I rewatched it a couple of times in advance for this, I just enjoyed it. It was a movie I found very easy to watch, which is something I can't say for every film I like.
Oh, and just like I wish we could all have one of Mike's White Russians while we're reading this book. Your essay had me wishing that we could do a multimedia presentation, because I so wanted the soundtrack on as I was looking for it. It's one of the best defenses of a soundtrack I think I've ever read.
It's you have a full, and the thing is, the soundtrack is only heard in snippets in the movie, but apparently every single song they perform is a full-length song. I've never heard the full soundtrack if it's available, but it's another one of those remarkable things that just falls by the wayside due to the movie's failure.
And before we go to Colm, I have to confess, I read that in your essay, and I immediately started checking my sources, the people that got me the 5-hour cut of Spinal Tap, and it's not out there as far as I can tell, but I'm not giving up yet. All righty. And now, Mr. Colm Lundberg, a writer, a talent I've always had tremendous respect for, and I certainly admire the way that whatever topic we do, Colm seems to attack a film. It's like, oh my God, why would there's so much to say about it. He did The Exorcist for Volume 1 and The Matrix for Volume 2. I just, how you get your stuff below 10,000 words. So, because there's so much to say about those films, but your ability to tackle these films is aptly and succinctly continues to amaze me. So if you wouldn't mind, please tell the folks what you're going to amaze us with in Volume 3.
Yeah, so I usually just vacuum pack the essays and it kind of shoots them down. It's kind of what I really do. Yeah, but I'm taking on. You mentioned soundtracks there. Actually, I'm taking on Krull, the famous 1980s movie, which came out in the shadow of Return of the Jedi, released in cinemas on the same week, which I think is partly responsible for its flop. That and the fact that, let's face it, in the 1980s, Hollywood had no clue what to do with fantasy. I mean, they just didn't. They could do some science fiction, that's fine, and they blended science fiction with fantasy to try and maybe understand fantasy a bit better. And Krull suffers from that a little bit. So do the films like Time Bandits, which were released the year before. But sword and sorcery, they just couldn't do. You either ended up with this kind of like, those kind of cheap novels with the rift guy and the person clinging onto their legs. They either had that type of fantasy film, or they'd something completely bizarre which no one could kind of get their hands around, like the infamous heavy metal movie. They just didn't know what to do with sword and sorcery. But Krull was one of those movies for me that, for the first time, I saw in it, and it's a standard kind of confused with a mismatched cast. It's another very bad attempt by Hollywood to do a fantasy film, but within it, there's certain glimpses of a fantasy writer. So if you consider fantasy films as typically trying to bring a book to the screen. Krull had snippets of what a good fantasy book would have, and they're kind of almost throwaway scene. Like there's a scene with the crystal spider, and the widow is trapped in the crystal spider, and it's almost thrown away as a comment when the wise man comes in. Ymir comes in and says, "Oh, you're there. I'm sorry that you were banished to the realms of the crystal spider after we were married because you killed our child." And you're going, wait, what? Well, hang on. I want to know about that story. Tell me about that story. There's more there I want to explore, or the whole kind of the shape-shifting demon in the forest, who's one of the people's help, and she just kind of tries to lure the hero and then tries to kill the hero, and she turns out to be the shapeshifter. And there's this whole realm of magic behind shapeshifting, which is just alluded to and referred to. And you kind of go, well, there's an entire movie in there, or an entire book in there. Like, well, what's going on here? And the ultimate thing that really grabbed me as a kid was the Cyclops. And the Cyclops, and it's the iconic thing from Krull, along with the glaive. And the Cyclops, of course, was bizarrely played by a Carry-On actor. Or an actor from the Carry-On movie franchise, which is very strange. But he appears a couple of times, and he saves them on one occasion. But rolled into the whole mysterious, Cyclops who only says a few lines, it's this mythos that he sold one of his eyes to the beast in order to gain access to see the future. But a trick was played on him, and he could only see the moment of his death. And if he didn't choose the moment of his death, then he would die in a horribly painful way. I mean, that's Greek myth stuff. Within that kind of encapsulated, again, almost throwaway thing is a whole beginning of a fantasy mythos in a movie. And for me, that was the first time I saw that. And I just I left Krull going, I want to know more about that world. I want to know more about the Cyclops. I want to know more about the magic. I want to know more about this realm that it just kind of dragged me through at breakneck speed, trying to cram so much into the movie. But there's those moments which I didn't see repeated in the 1980s in many sword and sorcery films. And it took a long time for those moments to reappear where I could go, I want to know more about. So that's kind of the reason I told me. In fact, when you pitched it to me, when you sent the email, I think you had the first 4 words out when I immediately said Krull. That Krull. I want to do Krull. Okay, I don't care. I want to do Krull. I think there was another writer bidding for Krull who I have to doff my hat to, and because I think they gracefully backed away in when faced with my frothing fervor. Sorry.
There's no book for there's no manual for how to be a book editor, but I have to tell you, one of the more lovely challenges I ever had was trying to suss out something between two unfailingly polite and kind people. It was just, you always hear about the bitter acrimony and petty fights in a creative process. I just had two very lovely people who were both trying to get out of the way. Like, well, no, one of you has to do it.
Like the opposite of a game of chicken. Like, whoa.
You can't both back off it.
Which is actually what we did initially, but yeah.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah, and it's and I one great thing about my job is it gives me a wonderful built-in excuse to revisit all these films. And one little random bit that I noticed about it was, I like how your essay puts it in the context of coming out in 1983. And forgive me while I put my political scientist hat on a little bit, but 1983, it was kind of the high tide of like social conservatism here in America. I know in the UK you had those were the Thatcher years, and from what I understand about Irish government, social conservatism is kind of the story from like 1921 dash.
We had
So
a lot of political instability in the 80s. I think we'd like 6 governments over a period of 7 years type thing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm not going to drift into my day job. But at the height of a socially conservative time on both sides of the Atlantic, they bring in Liam Neeson's character, who's just casually a polygamist. The fact it isn't just a throwaway line like I fought with your uncle during the Clone Wars. The fact that he's got multiple wives is totally unapologetic about it.
Absolutely, and he appears in the weird scene with Robbie Coltrane, and it's symptomatic of the film being at breakneck speed, because they jump out as bandits to rob the main character Culwin, and he goes, "Oh, I'm here to rob you and take all your stuff," and he goes, "Well, tell you what, don't rob me. I'm on this quest. Come with me." And they go, "Okay." Like, surely there should be more to that interaction, to persuade them to. Anyway, but the film is just moving at such a pace. But yeah, it was odd seeing Liam Neeson and indeed Robbie Coltrane, the late great Robbie Coltrane, in that one scene. I think they're about 12 years old back then.
Mm-hmm. I also confess having a weird transition. I edited your essay. I went upstairs and I was looking for something to watch, and I just randomly grabbed my 4K edition of Willy Wonka, not realizing that David Batley, the shapeshifter, is also Charlie Bucket's rather cracked science teacher. Yep. Who's like looking for any excuse to dismiss class. So in a way, he's kind of my spirit animal. and look at this. Look at this. The Kroll fandom is with us.
Do the glaive symbol.
Yes. All right. Okay. Now, one last Kroll question. I promise I will drop this. But okay. We were in 1983, the golden age of console video games, the era of Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. Did the Kroll game make it across the ocean?
I'm sad to say it did. Yeah.
Look at that. Yeah, you didn't enjoy the game?
I mean, I've very little memory of it. I think I was working off an Amiga 64 at that stage, which is one of those computers, as we probably all remember, that you almost had to type the games into.
Yes.
10 go to 50, all that kind of stuff. So I have vague memories of it, but I mean, as impressive as any game was, I suppose, on an Amiga.
Oh yeah, but my enduring film and memory of it before revisiting it is that the console video game hung around our local arcade for like a year after the film, to the point where there were people coming in and playing it, and like you would have to tell them, this was a movie, right? And they're like, no. There was a movie about this, and so yeah, but it's good to know it's got a legacy beyond the classic arcades. Yeah. Oh, and okay, now before I go around again with a question, I did want to make it a point to mention that for those of y'all that were tuning in expecting to see Eddie Webb, Eddie unfortunately came down with something, and speedy recovery to you. Hope you feel better soon. So he was unable to make it, and a similar bug has taken out Abe Smith, who's also unfortunately unable to join us. So we're sorry. We wish him a speedy recovery. And being an American who mostly understands the world through movies, when two of my UK-based creators are out due to a mysterious illness, I can only assume it's the rage virus from 28 Days Later. So so yeah.
I was going to say it was the humidity right now, but rage virus, humidity makes me angry. So.
Well, now we're under a heat advisory here in the United States. You guys are drowning in humidity over there?
No, it's not that bad. It's just changeable. I'd much rather have humid weather, occasionally humid weather, than smoke rolling in from the north. At least we don't have that.
Yes, yes. Sadly, our next door neighbor is literally on fire. So yes, and best wishes to Canada here today. All right. Well, as we make our way back around, I appreciate how all of you talked about how casting about a bit, and I'm always fascinated about what other films fall under this genre and almost got written about. And I thought I'd give Mike a chance to talk about. Were there other films that you almost wrote about? Other films, other flops that you have a soft spot for that almost made the cut for this book?
The one that really that I was umming and ahhing about. I mean, I didn't spend too long umming and ahhing, I have to say, when The Big Lebowski is kind of the option.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that came, was second in mind was Dr. Sleep, the 2019 Mike Flanagan film, which, again, I think it kind of washed its face at the box office, but it wasn't a tremendous success in that sense. And certainly, I remember the original Kubrick Shining coming out, and that being quite an event. Really, that definitely had an effect, and was talk of the town, as it were, for a while, and continued to be a topic of conversation for film buffs anyway, horror film buffs. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Sleep kind of came out and kind of happened, and very quietly, a little bit Ishtar, I guess, in a way. It was there, but then it went away very quickly. And I was intending to see it at the cinema, and I think it was like on for a week and then gone, and so I missed the opportunity. So it wasn't until it kind of turned up on streaming channels that, I'd forgotten all about it. I really want to see this, and sat down and watched it. And to be honest, because of that complete, lack of any kind of talk about it, any kind of critical kind of comments that I'd caught at the time, I was expecting it to be a complete dog. It was going to be terrible and would just not stack up against, let alone Stephen King's work. It wouldn't stack up against Kubrick's kind of film. So when I watched it, I was really surprised how good it was. I genuinely, there seemed to be Flanagan had seemed to genuinely put a lot of effort into tying the film not only to The Shining in terms of the cinematic version, but also tying it to King's version, to a sense, meshing the two in a way that I didn't think was really going to be that possible. And the kind of almost sensitive approach he took to the characters and the developing was kind of staggering, really. I found it on my first viewing, and then plus it's a horror film, and the horror's pretty good. There's a pretty good villain, so that was my second choice, and I just think it's one of those films that, again, because you've been talking about Ishtar, I just keep thinking about, for very different reasons it seems, but it's a film that kind of slipped out and everyone missed it or forgot about it. And yet it seems to be a little bit of an undiscovered gem, I think, perhaps.
When I was, I'm like you, I was a little surprised that film didn't do better than it did. But I remember thinking at the time that King has this, I guess maybe you have to be a creator and have one of your works abridged before you fully appreciate how monomaniacal you can be about this. Is his lingering bitterness and hatred for the Kubrick version, and the amount of this almost Garth Marenghi like obsession with he redid it on TV with sitcom actors. And it's almost like there's Kubrick Shining that people love and revisit, and then there's Stephen King's Shining, which we just don't seem to have as much love for, strangely enough.
Yeah, I mean, for many years, putting The Shining aside as a thing on its own, my impression, and I could be wrong, but my impression is that it has taken some years for filmmakers to kind of really capture the Stephen King novel on film, because there's been many done, haven't there?
Oh yes,
and they've all done okay, but it's not until more recent years where you've had kind of films that have actually gone, oh, that's a good film, I really enjoyed that, as opposed to, it was okay, you know. I don't know why. I don't really know particularly why. Maybe as King has developed as a writer, the stories are, you know, more easy to adapt. They're more potential for cinema. I don't know. But I mean, you know, obviously, this puts aside something like Carrie and De Palma. I think that's like the shining link. Those are the two kind of exceptions in the early works. But so that kind of interests me, I guess, in terms of how writers' works get adapted into other media, and how it can be quite hit and miss, you know. And obviously the standard critical reaction always, not like the book. Well, it's never going to be like a book because it's a film. But you know,
I love to hear Doctor Sleep getting some love, because for me it's like one of those kind of, it's like a soft spoken threat whispered in your ear that you remember for the rest of your life, kind of thing. It's one of those films that just is so almost gentle for most of it, and it just seeps into under your skin. I think it really kind of gets a hold of you.
They should have paid you to promote this film. I think you just sold some tickets with that description.
I know that I'm not sure if it's. I mean, I watched it on Prime UK, and at the time there were two versions. There was a director's cut. I was a little surprised how quickly there was a director's cut and the cinematic release. So hands up, I've only ever watched the director's cut, which I thought was good. So I can't comment on the theatrical and how different it is. I mean, I would struggle to kind of see there would be much difference, but I guess I got to get around to seeing that at some point.
Yeah, hopefully we won't get into a Wicker Man situation where it's like
half a dozen of various versions, but all of them fantastic.
Yeah, strangely enough, I wound up investing in the Australian import version where you get all 4 cuts, and the rather famous British author and critic Kim Newman does a commentary on the theatrical version and makes a pretty good case that for all of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that people have done over the cut versions, he said, you know, there's something to be said for this 80-minute version that does its business, and then good night, folks.
Yeah, I think that's probably quite true.
Yeah, it's a B feature. That's how it was released. It wasn't ever supposed to be the headline, and obviously I think most fans of horror love The Wicker Man. And I know that's a rather broad comment, but I don't think I've ever met a fan of horror who doesn't appreciate it in some way. But I think it works even better as a B feature, as a tight, tense thriller that builds to its inevitable horrifying conclusion. And then that's it. And then you're dropped into Bambi or whatever it is you're going to watch next.
That's a great double bill.
Yeah. The Odeon,
on the same island.
Yes, the Odeon stacked up the wrong reels.
Isn't one of the most joyous things you could hear is if you're with a group of friends and you're trying to decide what to watch, and somebody in the room says, "Oh, I've never seen The Wicker Man."
Yeah. And we can be those irritating people that watch someone watching something. So, yeah, you like that bit? Yeah. Wait for this bit. That's not for Eklund. That's a body double, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but if you're with someone who hasn't seen it before, you're 80 minutes. Let's get to poor Edward Woodward meeting his fate. Oh, and hey, well, I should probably put my publisher hat on and say, if you're a Wicker Man fan like all of us, the legendary Ken Hite is tackling The Wicker Man in Fantastic Flops. So if you would like to see what yet another member of our team has to say about this legendary film, please give us a pledge and check it out. You will definitely enjoy what Ken has to say about the film. All righty. Well, Matthew, did you have any runner-ups? Any close seconds as far as what you're going to do?
Yeah, I'm going to be really boring here because I was also going to say Doctor Sleep. And I did actually. I saw Doctor Sleep in its limited theatrical release window, and in my view, the theatrical cut is perfectly fine. And I have my own theories for why it didn't do well, or why Stephen King novels tend to be unfilmable, or have been seen as such, unless they're ultra slimline novels like Misery, or short stories quite often. But yeah, I feel like Mike Flanagan did an absolutely superb job making a thriller. I would classify it more as a thriller than a horror movie, and not in a bad way. But I would say that in my view, it flopped. And I've got nothing to back this up beyond anecdotal, I guess, jibber jabber. I think Mike Flanagan's rather subdued style, and it's funny Colin mentions, sort of whisper. Mike Flanagan's horror is like that. It is all very low key. It builds suspense. And it isn't quite bang. It's not screaming. There's monsters in the walls. It's none of that. And the problem is, Doctor Sleep was released right at the time when pretty much every horror movie that was coming out was a Conjuring, was a Paranormal Activity style jump scare-a-thon. And so and I think as well, it was advertised as being more subtle, more character-driven, more story-based than these things. And so the audiences who are going to view horror at that time weren't interested in Doctor Sleep. But it is a really interesting movie from the Stephen King canon because, like Mike said, there's so many that have been, I guess, abject failures. And most of them are TV movies, to be fair, or two-part TV movies over the late 80s and early 90s, like The Stand, which has moments, The Tommyknockers, which doesn't, Thinner, It, of course, where I think most people enjoy the first part for Tim Curry, and everyone detests the second part, not just for the stop-motion spider, but though that is a very good reason to not like it. But and The Langoliers. There were so many Stephen King TV movies that were just trash, and I say that as a big fan of Stephen King, the author. It was, I don't know whether it was the end result of a bad deal with a network that he basically said, hey, you pay me this much and you get the license to make X number of features. And as long as I can be an executive producer on them and make a cameo in all of them. And yeah, it could have just been the folly of youth. I know he'd been writing for a while at that point, but who knows? Who knows the story behind it and why they weren't blockbusters? Other than the fact that horror in the late 80s was seen as a bit of a Nightmare on Elm Street treadmill kind of affair. And so people weren't putting a lot of money into it. But yeah, then you move all the way forward to something like Doctor Sleep, and it's polished. It's, again, incredibly well performed. It's brilliantly paced, and it is completely unlike anything else that was released around that time. And I would say the closest thing to it in tension, interestingly, is the one, I don't know if it was directed by his son, the story written by his son. What was it? The Phone? I can't even remember the name of it now.
Yes.
Where the kid's trapped in the basement by the guy with the strange sort of devil mask. And I don't think it's called The Phone, so I'm blanking on that right now.
I can see the trailer in my head now.
It was again a really nicely paced horror movie that wasn't like all the other huge jump scare trash, that you get in the back catalogue of Netflix and Amazon Prime. So yeah, I agree. I think Doctor Sleep, big shame that it didn't do better. It certainly deserved to do better, and hopefully it's another movie that will get reappraised as the years go on.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All righty. Colm, did you have did you I know you had a backup plan because you were trying to politely back off from Kroll. So,
Yeah.
so what was your plan B?
No, there was only Cruel. No, yeah. I suppose Plan B is oddly enough a Mike Judge movie, Idiocracy.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those. I've always felt and thought as a writer and as a person that if you want to understand people, society, a thing, that you look at the extremes and you work your way back from the extremes to find the kind of common center. But it's in seeing the extremes that you as challenging as they may be or as unpleasant as they may be, that you begin to kind of understand the center, I think, a bit better. And I think Idiocracy is an example of that, and similar to Dr. Sleep, it just about washed its face in the box office. I think it took in about just over its cost production, but it's one of those movies that society increasingly seems to be adopting as a manual for how to evolve and behave, rather than an actual satirical comedy. People, I'm still waiting for a wrestler to appear in the 2024 U.S. presidential elections, but they probably do. But
we would elect one governor.
yeah. I mean, they may do a better job. Who knows? But it's full of those kind of little scenes and little again, little kind of cameos, little kind of blinks in of things that really merit kind of further examination or merit consideration as satirical comments. I mean, even the phrase I've used before, at various trade stands, like "Welcome to Costco, I love you," that kind of. But even in that one phrase, there's a lot of unpacking in that one comment, kind of thing. Like, you know what I mean? And the mockery of the penal system and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot, I think, to unpack in that movie, and it's certainly more than meets the eye. And I know, kind of, Mike Judge obviously kind of comes in on the heavily kind of asinine, satirical, or kind of like crude humor, satire kind of field. And he wouldn't be my favorite kind of person, but I think Idiocracy is one of those things that, again, there's little pockets of genius or pockets of certain phrases and throwaway events that really need a lot of unpacking.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things, as we were in the final stage of putting subversive sci-fi together, I did have a thought where it's like, why is it that science fiction, this genre that's obsessed with predicting the future, it's like you look back on it and it's always like Metropolis is what we get. It's never Forbidden Planet. It's we get more Soylent Green than Star Trek. It's like, why is it that the dystopias seem to have a much better track record? And I'm not a pessimistic person by nature, but wow, and
preparation. Preparation. That's yeah. No, I think as a species, I think we're psychologically fascinated or drawn to the negative, or drawn to the darker side of human psyche. Certainly, as creatives, I think collectively here we could probably say that that's true of us. We tend towards the darker side. I think people are like that. I think it allows you to explore kind of maybe the human condition a little bit more. I think the nice and happy and optimistic and everything's always cheerful maybe doesn't offer a challenge. That's just a thought off the top of my head now. I don't know, but
yeah. Well, let me. I want to throw. God, I have the perfect group of people to ask this question of. I'll give each of you a chance to talk about this. But I saw a phrase once, and it is back when I was an undergrad, and it has stuck with me ever since. And it goes is nobody does better end of the world stories than the British. And as I've worked my way through, Day of the Triffids and 28 Days Later, and I'm thinking, and hey, and Dr. Christian Hudson is tackling Children of Men for Fantastic Flops. Could certainly add that to the list. But do you think people in the Isles have a special gift for end of the world stories? And if so, why? And if one of you wants to dive in and run with that.
Must not make political comment about Irish versus British. Must resist.
I'd watch an Irish post-apocalyptic or Irish dystopian movie. I don't know how much you probably ought to speak more to it culturally than I could, Colm. What an Irish view would be on dystopia. But yeah, I think my touchstone for British dystopia is Threads, coincidentally the popular new social network, where which very much sets a certain tone for our view in the 80s of what a nuclear holocaust may just be like, with none of the fantastical elements of A Day of the Triffids, or indeed Survivors, or any of these other TV shows that were coming out at the time. It was just grim, grim, grim all the way down. And yeah, it feels to me, because I think it no doubt happened all across Europe and definitely America, the nuclear fear in the 70s and 80s seemed to strike a chord culturally in Britain that then came through in a lot of media around that time. I think it was helped by Thatcher, and that's about the only time I would say something was helped by Thatcher, because there was a feel of cultural erosion and societal erosion around that time too, which also meant it was very easy to film in places at low cost, because you had lots of steelworks, lots of docks, lots of quarries, lots of these places that were now abandoned, or the rent was very low. So you saw loads of TV and movies move to these places. So yeah, I don't know that we kept hold of it as strongly as we had it in the 80s and early 90s. It occasionally popped up again with there's some decent TV shows like The Last Train. That's a post-apocalyptic or dystopian kind of both TV show that I don't think has ever been repeated. But it was fun at the time. And I think we just have a certain amount of resentment. We certainly did then about the way the 80s were treating us. It came through in our media, as media does.
I can speak very highly of The Last Train. I had it on my screen during a mandatory work seminar and watched that instead, and really perfect circumstances to share that. And just, I have to have a shout out to all the Blake 7 fans out there, as Matthew talks about old industrial locations being used. So yes, Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to expand the decade really from what Matthew was saying. I mean, I grew up in the 1970s, and in fact, I was having this conversation the other day on a podcast I do, and talking about why we're into horror. And I think, well, we were completely born into it in the 1970s. No matter where we went, there was horror in the very real sense of fictional horror everywhere, as well as real. I was explaining that as a kid at primary school, we were pulled into the the hall, and we were shown public health information films, which you can now watch on YouTube, and they are still gratuitously gory, horrific, scary. We're talking about the Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, Apaches, where a bunch of kids go playing on I think it's a farm in the Apaches, and they all die horribly. I mean, this is like
is the water one where death comes up to the camera at the end and says, "Next time it could be."
that wasn't me seeking it out. That was me just going to school, and then you turn on the TV, and children's television in the afternoon after school, you would have programs like The Changes, which has got one of the most terrifying intros I've ever seen, and Children of the Stones, and so forth. And then Doctor Who, with everyone hiding behind the sofas at the giant maggots and spiders. All of that, as well as, an economy collapsing, bin men strikes, and the bomb as well, and so on and so on. So, I mean, I see the 80s as a kind of like the fruiting body of what the 70s was under the soil, and then fruited in the 80s, and
Oh, I like that.
Like threads, that's the way I kind of tend to view it. Yeah. So
yeah, when the wind blows, what a heartwarming cartoon that was.
Yeah.
by the creator of the Snowman.
Absolutely. It's about sublime to the ridiculous. This is one, what have you done this year? I've done the Snowman. What are you doing next year? Oh, when the wind blows, about nuclear devastation. Fair enough. But I think it's kind of almost, certainly my generation, the kind of dystopia is ingrained. I mean, I look back and, you've got, John Wyndham and Triffids has always been a massive influence on me. But, going further back, 1984, Orwell kind of laid the template here. And it's, we've kind of been running with it ever since, I think.
Yeah. Because I was sitting here trying to think, like, is there any you mentioning stuff like threads, like, is there anything that's equal? And the only thing that pops in my head is Peter Watkins' The War Game, which of course he did for the BBC. So
the War Game, absolutely, yeah.
Colin, do you have some thoughts about Doomsday?
I think from an Irish perspective, I think the Irish have always kind of culturally been dark as a people. I think we've always kind of had this had this tension between the reality that we were forced to deal with and the reality that we wanted to expand into, and the tension between those, combined with this historical background. I mean, for about 800 years in Ireland, we were the center of learning in Europe, and with that came so much kind of conflicted philosophies and conflicted teachings alongside the kind of fairy folk and the kind of the rich cultural tradition that we had there, and the clash between those two linked to this tension that people were consistently drawn between. If I go here, it's fire and brimstone. If I go here, I'm going to be tortured by the banshee or the Avatar or all these kind of things. And that cultural tension and where you fit into that, and culture as an expression of identity, how you define yourself between those two kind of dark draws and forces, I think can lead to a very kind of insular and inward look. And if you look at Irish literature particularly, and particularly kind of the late the 1800s and the 1900s, that has this kind of struggle of darkness versus identity as a running theme throughout it. I think if I may comment kind of broadly maybe as well on the British kind of to tend towards dystopia, I think a lot of that might have to do with I say this with no acrimony at all. It's just just purely historical fact. When you have an empire, a massive empire, any empire in history is built on blood. So the British Empire as it was evolved within a constant state of war. For hundreds of years, concentrated conflict, concentrated war. I don't think that right up until to World War I, World War II, there was wars erupting in parts of the British Empire. So it was and even within the island of Britain, and there was always the tension between the three, what they call the three home nations. So I think when you have a culture that's had that collective trauma, for want of a better term, for those kind of centuries as it expanded and then tried to maintain the empire, I think that again in turn leads to this almost inherent thread of the value of life. What does that mean in the face when our sons and our daughters are going out to fight these wars and not coming back, kind of thing. So I think and if you have that, as I say, for centuries, I think it kind of leads to this inherent kind of leaning towards so kind of an Irish fascination with supernatural and death in brief, and then an English fascination with well, not fascination but experience with war and that kind of thing, I think.
If I can make one recommendation, and it's not even a movie, so we're off piste rather. There's a novel by an author by the name of James Herbert, which a lot of horror literature fans will know. Mentioning Garth Marenghi earlier, there's certain connections there. But there's a novel by James Herbert called Domain, which is the third in his Rats trilogy. And it's a wonderful combination of nuclear holocaust in London and well done, you survived it. Now you're going to be eaten alive by giant mutated rats. And it's just such a perfect blend of English 80s, in my view, just, I guess, malaise and oh fuck, another thing, and if the radiation poisoning doesn't get you, the two-headed rat will. But it's a wonderful novel. I love so many of James Herbert's novels, and Domain really stands up as almost like an extension of Threads. You want to know what happened in London instead of Sheffield, read Domain, and it's not much better.
And Sean, speaking up for Garth Marenghi. All right, here we go. We can throw a little love their way before we wrap up today. Well, as we're just now past an hour, I thought we'd wrap things up, give everybody a chance to talk about things they're working on. Mike, do you have some exciting stuff coming up you want to tell the folks about?
Yeah, I guess. On the Call of Cthulhu front, we've got a bunch of books, heading to the printer very soon. Things like a new edition of Cthulhu by Gaslight, and a new edition of Arkham, the kind of quintessential New England town where the Miskatonic University is, and all that kind of thing. So we've got a big book I've spent quite a long time working on and building in lots of depth and adventure ideas and so forth, and characters. So those are kind of big kind of projects that have been eating my time for some time, that are kind of coming out now. But the most recent thing is I've just started mentioned earlier, a new podcast with my friend Paul Fricker. We both kind of worked on. We both wrote the new edition of Call of Cthulhu, 14 years ago now. But we've just started a new podcast called Mason and Fricker's Eldritch Stories, and that's, you can search Eldritch Stories. You'll find us on all of social media. You can watch and hear the conversations on YouTube, and we basically do a kind of every other episode where it's us two chatting about horror and games and that kind of thing. But the actual first, the other alternate episodes are actually what you might term horror microfiction or weird fiction that we've each written, and then we read each other's stories. So there's one per episode, and we've just put out the first story, which is one of mine called Zooty. And then we've done an episode of Chat, which has just come out this week. And so next week will be Paul's first story. So if you like a bit of horror fiction and a bit of chatting about horror and games in between, then eldritchstories.com. Check us out.
Yeah, and two of my favorite people. Please say hello to Paul for me. Paul had me on when we were still trying to get Transgressive Horror launched, and he was so kind to have me on his show and help us out. So I'm so glad two of my favorite people are teaming up to do something cool like that. All right, Matthew, what's going on in your creative world?
Ooh, a couple of things. Speaking for the company, Onyx Path, we currently have Trinity Continuum Aegis on Backakit, which is our ancient Greek Trinity Continuum game, where you can play inspired heroes and the like in just around the fall of the Bronze Age. But don't let that stop you from backing fantastic flops. And also for just $4.99 on DriveThruRPG, we released the World Below Ashcan edition. This is our first time we've gone into the Ashcan variety of everything super condensed, introductory adventure, some pre-written characters, all the powers you need. Boom, go, see what you think of it for the World Below, which, as I mentioned earlier, is our big new fantasy game, which I've conceptualized and developed with a wonderful team of authors, including Ed Greenwood, who was an absolute joy to have as a co-author on this. Just wonderful ideas coming from his mind, as you'd imagine. And yeah, I would love it if more people pick up The World Below Ashcan edition and get a sneak preview of what's to come in the full core book.
All righty. And Colm, who's totally not a secret agent for the Irish government. You want to tell us what you're working on?
I'm not secret about it at all. It's on my business card. So these podcasts always happen when I've just kind of gone into a situation of agreement and I can't talk about them. But I can say that there's a card game we're working with a big games company, and we just kind of got the artwork for it kind of rolled in, so that's pretty exciting to see that kind of being put together. And I have a few publications kind of pending for a well established RPG line. and more to come on that as well. Again, which I can't talk about, which should be released in the next few months, all being well. So yeah, I mean, look, I'll keep people posted as much as possible. But stuff I can't talk about directly, of course.
But one thing we can talk about is the fact that if you enjoy movie banter like this, then please go to the URL that's on your screen right now, and please donate whatever you can. We're you can get Volume 3 is going to be a fantastic book. You can pick up Volume 1 and 2 at rock bottom prices if you miss those, and you will keep a small but mighty label intending on giving wonderful, talented folks like this a voice and an opportunity to comment and lead you toward neglected and overlooked films. Now, we're not going to be doing a show this Sunday. This is kind of our Sunday show, but we'll be back on Sunday, August the 6th at 8 o'clock Eastern Colonial Time. And that will kind of be our last 3-day countdown to the end of the Fantastic Flops Kickstarter. And please keep an eye on the Ghost Show Press Facebook page for links, and we look forward to seeing you there. But until then, thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen, and we look forward to the next time we all get together and talk about film. But until then, this has been the Ghost Show.